In this video, we will explore how you can interpret the thoughts of others through 3 simple strategies. These methods are essential for overcoming any circumstance, as mastering them makes the interpretation and understanding of others' thoughts significantly easier. We will analyze a Stoic story that illustrates how to decipher the minds of others. The narrative takes place in an ancient village where 2 brothers lived. The older brother was blind and spent most of his time at home, while the younger brother worked in agriculture. They often noticed that their field was ravaged by wild animals. Concerned about this situation, the younger brother decided to ask the blind brother for help to scare away the animals. He could stand among the crops and alert him if he heard any sounds. So, the younger brother built a small cabin in the field and took the older brother there, explaining, "Brother, if you hear any suspicious noise, just shout to scare away the animals. This will protect our harvest." The older brother accepted the proposal and began to fulfill his role. Whenever he heard animal sounds, he shouted to scare them away. Days went by like this. One day, a deer quickly crossed the field, damaging part of the fence before escaping. Soon after, the king, who was in pursuit of the deer, approached the blind brother and asked if he had seen the animal pass. The blind brother replied, "Your Majesty, I am blind. How could I see a deer? However, I can assure you that the being that fled from my field is not worth your hunt. You are wasting your efforts." The king was surprised by the words of the blind brother and began to doubt whether he was telling the truth, for despite his blindness, he spoke with conviction. The blind brother then explained, "Your Majesty, the being you are pursuing is actually a pregnant doe. I cannot recall a monarch who has hunted a pregnant doe, so I believe your efforts are in vain." Astonished, the king could not understand how the blind man could determine the doe's state. He wondered how someone without sight could be so certain. Driven by curiosity, he ordered his commander, "Capture this animal alive. I need to check if it is indeed pregnant. The blind brother seems very convinced, and I must investigate. Go now and confirm its state." The commander followed the king's orders, and upon returning the next day, confirmed that the blind brother was right. The doe was indeed pregnant. The king, perplexed, could not comprehend how the blind man knew about the animal's pregnancy. He then summoned the blind brother to clarify the mystery. The king said, "I may doubt that you are truly blind, so I will ask you a question. Are you willing to give me an honest answer?" The blind brother replied, "Your Majesty, ask what you will, and I will respond with total sincerity." The monarch continued, "You are a man of remarkable insight and seem to have a deep understanding of various issues. I summoned you today to find out if my wife is unfaithful." The blind brother asked, "Your Majesty, what made you raise this question? Your marriage has endured for many years. Why do you have doubts now?" The king insisted, asserting, "You must answer this question. Otherwise, you will be condemned to death." Faced with the monarch's threat, the blind brother replied, "Your Majesty, to give you the answer you seek, I need you to fulfill one of my requests." The king questioned, "What is this request?" "I need to be alone with your wife in the room," said the blind brother. At first the king hesitated, but eventually agreed, and ordered his commander to leave the blind brother and the queen alone. At that moment, the blind brother expressed his intention to make physical contact with the queen. After a brief struggle, the blind man managed to escape and presented himself to the king, informing, "Your Majesty, your wife is not faithful to you." Enraged, the king drew his sword and went to the queen, warning that any lie would result in her execution. The queen, after a brief moment of silence, confirmed the betrayal. The king, impressed, immediately turned to the blind brother and asked how he knew of his wife's infidelity. The blind brother replied, "Your Majesty, it was simple. I mentioned to your wife my desire to touch her, and her reaction was so fierce that she began to attack me instead of rejecting me. Now tell me, how can a woman who reacts like this be faithful?" Impressed by the blind man's insight, the king exclaimed, "Your perception is admirable. Let's proceed. Give the correct answer to another question, and you will be freed." The king asked, "Tell me, am I truly my father's son or another man's?" The blind brother replied, "This concern must be dissolved." The king insisted, "No, I need a concrete answer, otherwise the doubts will consume me." The blind brother responded, "Your Majesty, I can reveal your lineage now, but first I need your promise that you will not react with anger." The king nodded. The blind man said, "You are your father's son, but you have also been influenced by a greedy merchant." Upon hearing this, the king immediately turned to his mother and asked, "Mother, I demand that you speak the truth. Am I my father's son or another man's? If you do not tell me, I will renounce my existence." The king's mother replied, "Son, you truly are your father's descendant, but you have also been influenced by a greedy merchant." Relieved, the king turned to the blind brother and asked, "How did you know I was influenced by a greedy merchant?" The blind brother replied, "Your Majesty, I have answered many of your questions correctly, but until now, I have received no reward. Based on that, I concluded your tendency toward greed." The king laughed and said, "What you ask will be granted, but explain how you differentiate right from wrong. How can you provide such precise answers?" The blind brother explained, "My blindness is innate. If I had sight, I could easily understand the thoughts of others. The mind has its own language, reflected in body movements. By observing the eyes, lips, and gestures, one can understand what is going on in a person's mind. But being blind, I perceive through actions to comprehend what is happening in their minds." The king asked, "Does that mean I can also understand others' thoughts?" The blind brother replied, "Undoubtedly you can discern others' thoughts, but first you must work on yourself. This work involves calming your mind and focusing on the present. Today, I will show you 3 simple and accessible methods. First, pay attention to the eyes and body language. They are the messengers of emotions. In moments of sadness, they reflect that feeling, while a sincere laugh, brightening the eyes and lifting the cheeks, signifies happiness. Eyes that shine and sparkle can be trusted as a sign of true joy. Also, pay attention to the area between the eyebrows, where wrinkles form under tension, often expressing confusion, intense reflection, or an effort to understand something complex. The second technique, Your Majesty, involves observing nonverbal language. The body and hands can communicate a lot without words, creating a secret language that expresses desires and feelings through gestures such as tapping fingers or making a repetitive sound. This can indicate boredom, urgency, or a desire to end the conversation. I remember once when someone seemed very interested in selling me something. Their fingers tapped quickly, showing disinterest or anxiety to finish our conversation. On the other hand, someone who remains still and adopts a relaxed posture demonstrates attentiveness, reflecting genuine interest. I recall that my perceptive teacher often adopted this posture. Although calm, he leaned in with interest, showing his desire to deepen the discussion. People who constantly manipulate their faces during a conversation may give clues about their thoughts. These gestures also indicate anxiety. Furthermore, hand movements can reveal a lot. For instance, if someone quickly touches their nose during a conversation, it may suggest they are lying or not entirely honest. Paying attention to how people react to our words and understanding what occurs in their minds can help interpret their thoughts. Before continuing, it is crucial to concentrate your attention on the present. Only then can you observe this behavior, interpret it, and understand what is going on in the other person's mind. If you get caught up in worries or anxieties about the future, you will never be able to grasp the other person's body language, and therefore will not understand their thoughts. Now, Your Majesty, let's move on to the third technique. To understand someone's thoughts, observe their voice. The voice can reveal a lot about what the person is thinking and feeling. A hurried and excited tone, for example, may indicate anxiety, while someone who speaks slowly and calmly is likely centered and relaxed. Pay attention to the tone of voice. A high and piercing tone may express anger or frustration, while a soft and calm tone suggests peace and relaxation. I remember a conversation with someone who claimed to be happy. However, their voice was tense, filled with doubts about their true joy. The voice can also express emotions, as in cases of sighs, screams, or genuine laughter. By paying attention to how people articulate words and use tone, you will easily understand their thoughts and feelings. And that's all, Your Majesty. These are the 3 techniques I have shared with you. Observe the eyes, body language, and voice of the person. Focus on these 3 aspects, and you will be able to decipher their thoughts. However, remember that you must first concentrate your mind on the present. Only then will you be able to observe, interpret, and perceive what is happening in the other person's mind. In this way, you can understand their thoughts and enrich your existence. Thank you for watching this video, and I believe these tips will be valuable to you. Consider sharing them with those who need to know them, as wisdom must be shared to flourish, and consider subscribing to the channel as well. Leave your comment, as your opinion is valuable for us to keep improving.